everybody. We are very excited to be here. My name is Brian Pena, and I am with Define Events and Education. And we are super excited about today's topic and more excited about our speakers today. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started with telling you a little bit about how we're going to go through today's events. If you haven't known this, we do things a little differently at Define Events and Education, which is starting with using a different platform. So congratulations to all of you who have navigated the complexities of this newer element. We're very excited about some of the features we presented with you today. So if you're just on board, hopefully you were able to go through the speed networking session. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about housekeeping with some of this newer app, and then we'll quickly go into our speakers, Jimmy Iannuzzi and Marko MrKonich. Very, very excited about the speakers. They are a wealth of information and perspective, and we're going to have a lot of great detail to go over to you, okay? So who is Define? Define Events and Education. We are an organization fostered towards advancing insight and educational materials to advance the future of work and Define Solutions. What we do is we are a consultancy firm focused on helping HR tech platforms and enterprises leverage new and exciting ways of getting things done using human capital. That's us, and that's all I'm going to talk about right now. This is going to acquaint you with the AirMeet control panel. You'll see the other attendees right there with the little button. If you want to send any direct messages to people individually, you can click that button there. If there are any announcements or alerts, fire drills or what have you, you'll see that little red dot on top of the button. If you look on the left-hand side over there, there's a little chat button. Share your thoughts with all the other attendees at the end. If you want to post any questions, we encourage you to use the live Q&A tab there. We're going to be posting some polls. And then if you want to expand the instruction tab or hide it or show it, you click on that up or down button right there on the left. If you want to see more, if you want to expand the screen to fit your whole screen, look at that little outward arrow button, click on that, and that will expand the entire screen so you'll cover all of your browser and visual field. And then of course hit escape to make that smaller. If you are having any issues with the technology, I encourage you to use the technical support table in the lounge or email our technical support contact, rahul@airmeet.com. But if you're seeing this and you're seeing me, hopefully you're not having any of those troubles. We do have a polling tab on the right-hand side. If you look to your left, I'm going to go ahead and share a quick poll just to acquaint you with the issues right there. I'm going to publish it. Let's see how it shows. And you can see the event on the right-hand side, the question and how you want to show that. And we encourage you to vote. And while you're getting acquainted with the voting tab, I'm going to keep on moving forward, and we'll share the events afterwards. Moving on, and yes, this is an incredibly data-heavy session. One of the things that I am super excited about is that a lot of detail in terms to referenceable case law and also application of artificial intelligence in real terms is going to be presented today. So I want to answer this question ahead of time, get it out of the way. Yes, the slides will be available to all attendees after the session. Okay. Moving on. So again, with the housekeeping, how do we get here? When we think about artificial intelligence and contingent work, the application for these elements are endless. 84% of executives recognize that artificial intelligence and including automated technology are existential to the survival of their business. But at the same time, 75% of those also say that it's incredibly difficult to put them, expand these technologies into their organizations. A lot of it has to do with fears of bias or hiring risk or the negative experience for their candidates. So what we wanted to do today was share a holistic perspective in terms of what it takes to encourage and build responsible artificial intelligence recruiting, focusing on candidate experience and best practices, at the same time acknowledging the complexities that happen with the law and the actual application of those laws. So Marko's going to talk a little bit about the actual case law that supports a lot of the things that people are incredibly risky and risk averse about. Okay, so let's go farther on down. And without further ado, I want to introduce you to our speaker, Jimmy Iannuzzi. So Jimmy will be joining me on stage right now. Jimmy, hello, welcome.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me. This is great.
It's really excited to be here. Jimmy, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk a little bit about nTech and yourself and we'll go right into some of the materials, and then we can get to Marko's stuff.
Excellent. That sounds great. I'm excited for Marko's presentation. I think he has some tremendous data and case studies there to go over. But nonetheless, I'll spend more time with nTech than on me. But nonetheless, nTech Workforce, we are a recruiting and staffing agency located here in the greater capital region in Columbia, Maryland, which is about halfway between Baltimore and DC, for those who aren't familiar. So we are an MBE organization. We work a lot with CRMSDC, the Capital Region Council of the National Supplier Development Council as well. So for us, we are a fierce, passionate staffing agency. For us, we really believe in the value of partnership and process. That's really where I see the nth degree of staffing, is that intersection of process and partnership. But nonetheless, some other quick hits for you. We are ISO certified around our staffing processes. This means when you use nTech, our recruiting lifecycle, job management, onboarding, offboarding, all of that is governed by the ISO 20001, 2018 standards, and we're audited on those. So that's our process component. But we've had some nice awards over the years. So this is Game Changer Award for Outstanding Program Performance with the Exxon Contingent Labor Program, Best Value Supplier for Care First, which is a Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliate. We were Supplier of the Year nominee for the Class 2 category from the NMSDC. And the old BBJ, we were a nominee for Best Places to Work. So for me, I've been with nTech for 10 years this June, which is hard to believe, in a variety of roles, from recruiting, client relations, dabbling in sales, as we all, I feel like, do. Everybody's in sales at some point or another. And at this point now, as our vice president and general managers. That's the 2-minute overview on nTech. I think I got that down.
You did that incredibly fast. That's very well done. Yeah. So let's get into it. Importance of AI and automation. I'm going to publish a random poll on the right-hand side. So you'll see that, and maybe we'll share some of those results during the talk. So take it away. Talk about AI and automation at nTech.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're framing the discussion around importance, why it matters at the end of the day, was how we like to term it at nTech. That's a cultural term at this point. Why does this matter? So why this matters, if we're going to foreshadow risks, what does that look like? And also, what are considerations as we balance both of them? I think that's the name of it. But I think for a lot of folks, they don't realize that with the staffing organization that we actually don't get paid unless we close. Unless you're working with a retained search firm for high-level executives and headhunters, typically you get paid if you close. And so for us, our number one cost that we incur is actually sourcing candidates. This is why markups are the way they are when we talk about recruiting. It's why fees are the way they are. It's because we have to recoup cost for the sourcing time, because we're doing that kind of on the arm, as it were. So for us, one of the big reasons why AI and automation is important is to really enable that sourcing function and to speed it up, to condense the sourcing process. If we can do that, we can save everybody money, which is really great. We don't have to, our markups can be reduced, our fees can be reduced, because we are not spending as much upfront time recruiting. So for me, I like to get to the bottom line right away. When we talk about bottom line recruiting, if we can save money through AI and automation, that's going to flow to everybody, our partners and customers, as well as nTech itself. So that's one of the main why it matters for me when I think about AI and automation in the recruiting lifecycle, is how can we catalyze that process, enable sourcing, and reduce our time to source.
Fantastic. What about the candidate? Oh, go on. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you don't mind just popping back for 1 second, Brian.
No problem.
Yeah, and then with that time savings, you might ask, well, what else would you do? I think we can all agree, that automation and AI isn't a silver bullet. It is a component of all recruiting. So for us, what we like to do is then take that time saved with deeper human engagement, especially in today's talent market. Being able to engage with the talent more deeply is going to make a better talent pool and better delivery of our talent. And this also allows a final factor is that same thing, is rapid hiring. We can hire quicker, not just because it saves money, but because candidates are driving a faster market. They want a process that wraps up quickly. And so this can help enable that. All right. Why it matters, but also, things that we want to look for. Brian, you and I in our prep are talking a lot about this. How are we learning the behaviors moving forward? How is AI, automation, machine learning, all of these sort of terms and tools identifying our hiring pattern? Well, I think, DE&I has been an incredible topic. And, for us as an MBE, it's been really great to see the conversation bubbling and becoming, top of mind for everybody. I could go on about our partnerships around DI, and it's really important to us. And our co-founder, Surjit, always talks about how we'll never be MBE in name only. And it's become part of our foundation as a company. But nonetheless, we're here today and we're talking about it. And it's okay. If we're going to look back at our hiring patterns, well, I think we can all agree as a society that maybe, just maybe, we haven't been the most equitable in our hiring decisions. That unconscious or even maybe conscious bias seeps into that process. Candidate A, who we hired, maybe 2 years ago, and that is identified as a success pattern. Do we want to necessarily learn from some of the bad practices and some of the unconscious and conscious biases that fed into that hiring decision? So I think that's really important as we look forward, is making sure that we're not just reinforcing the bad habits and unethical behaviors that frankly have plagued some of the hiring decisions that have been made across the country over the last, umpteen years and going back even farther.
That's really interesting, Jimmy. I just want to point out that while we have a poll that we have up, and the simple question is, does AI reduce or reinforce unconscious bias in hiring? And so far, we have a lot of people who are still continuing to vote, so I don't want to share the results just yet, but it's running at about 50-50, which I think is super interesting, is that it also reduces and or reinforces. So there's still a lot of definitions and a lot of understandings that need to be evolving, because if it's that direct, that's a significant challenge for the growth of these companies moving forward.
Yeah, sometimes, we want to learn from our experiences, and, but we also sometimes don't want to repeat our experiences. And we talk a lot about repeatable process at nTech, and, it's important. You want to take a successful, what we've deemed historically successful, and be able to make that repeatable moving forward. Well, we want to also weed out, some of maybe those practices in the past that have led to perhaps an unfair process, generally speaking. We want to promote the good of the conversation around D&I that's happening in 2020 and 2022, and not really, let's not necessarily hire how we used to. I guess that's the message. I think we need to be very conscious that hiring how we used to is not necessarily something we want to package up and reprogram out.
Yeah, I'm super fascinated by these results. Now it's 60% reduced, 40% reinforced. So they're fighting neck and neck. I'm going to keep that poll live for a little while longer, and I'll share it once we're a little farther along. But please take a moment to look to the right and go ahead and complete one of the polls, and we'll share those results. We're going to have a couple polls at a time. So really fascinating perspective that we're getting here.
Excellent. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, let's be frank too. Some of these technology tools can help eliminate these unconscious biases. It's really about how we apply them. I think Mark will probably talk a little bit more deeply around some of the definitions and what we can do around it. But I think it's really important that we, as I say, use technology for good, not evil. And that's really important as we move forward. It can be done the right way and the wrong way. So we have to get there. And if you don't mind, I'll just on the last slide, just finish up on there. I think it's again, questioning the risk. With our team, it's something we really are focusing on. Like, we can't just rely on the technology. If anybody's done polling, automated polling or surveys, you can say that you're going to get some good feedback and results. But the more vulnerable and the more deep discussions you may have with the surveyee are that follow-up phone call, that human-to-human connection. So we want to make sure that, while we're saving time and speeding up process, we're redeploying our availability towards engagement with the workforce. And then lastly, Brian, you and I talk about this a lot as well. It's, in today's market, finding an apples to apples fit for your role can be very hard. The talent market is very demanding. The candidates are driving that market. And, what I'm advising a lot of organizations and frankly, I think internally as well, instead of looking for that, apples to apples fit, hire for opportunity. and hire for folks that can fill your role with the right hands-on training and commitment to culture. And with technology, you may miss some of those candidates because on paper they don't look like the right fit. We, for example, we had one of our most successful recruiters nTech has had historically. They were a football coach before they came to nTech. That wouldn't have shown up on any recruiter search necessarily. Maybe it would after we made the successful hire, but that's the kind of thing we need to look at: hire for opportunity and hire for fit versus
You bring up my favorite topic, which is something I posted about this recently on LinkedIn, is that I don't think that many of us who are on the phone would have gotten our career starts 20, 10, 15 years ago if we had to go through an ATS. I know my first real opportunity, there was no way in the universe that I would have gotten the same opportunity if that was presented to me in 2022. And I think recognizing the limitations of these technologies as something to increase efficiency, speed, it shouldn't be a gatekeeper that prevents you from really seeing the magic that comes from hiring for opportunity. And I think that's really was a great point that I loved during our conversation before, was focusing on that.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah. And then here we are in terms of the harmonization component. We need to, when we're talking about implementation, this is kind of where I'm getting to, something we practice at nTech as we evolve our organization. It's very helpful because we have a process map, a quality manual system, so we can identify our steps and our processes. But I call this best athlete. When we look at who is the best athlete to handle this? Is it a technology or is it a human? And being honest and candid about that is very important. Having a strong culture as well is important in your organization as you go through this, because a lot of folks may, balk at this, but whoa, no, the human's the best athlete for this step. Well, it's like, if you have a strong culture, you understand, look, we're not trying to replace you. We're trying to, reallocate your time to things that you uniquely can do. And I think that's a really big part of it. I think where people who are maybe adverse to change or are struggle a little bit identifying the fact that maybe some of their job could be, utilized by a technology, they get defensive because they think we're trying to replace them. And this is where strong culture comes into play. Explain your why. But you also really need to have that honest discussion. Who's the best athlete? Is it a human or technology for this? And this is something I think Marco is certainly going to get to and can help. This is a quote. I put this in quotes because I did not quote this. This was, I was in a conversation with some friends from Job Diva because we were talking about AI and machine learning. And they said it's often misunderstood, overused, and underdefined. And I thought that was really important. So if you're looking to implement some sort of artificial intelligence, we need to really understand how it's defined, what we're talking about here, and not just throw these terms around. I take a lot of demos because at nTech, we're really trying to catalyze a lot of our processes with technology. But, when you talk like, okay, you're like, oh, we have AI. And you ask them, oh, okay, what does AI mean to your organization? You get 10 different answers from 10 different companies. So I think when you get in this journey, define what you're looking for. I think that's a really important step. And then lastly, I just think, your sequences, your target audiences, really structured properly, risk turning off your talent community and losing engagement. nTech, we've tried and we failed at times. And then we engaged with a platform before, had all the promises and bells and whistles of automated technology. I'm not going to name names. It was I don't believe in doing that, but nonetheless, we made a bad choice in hindsight, and I have no problems admitting that. And then, one of the examples we looked for, it's classic at nTech now. We were seeking a Java architect, and our AI quote unquote tool was reaching out to like architects, like civil engineers. Yeah. And we would get some crazy emails back, and it was really, we lost engagement with some of our potential leads, and we misfired. And so I think this is really important as well, to make sure that, our audiences are structured properly, our sequences are right, we are hitting the nail on the head. There is still a trepidation from certain recipients of these sorts of messaging that kind of look at it with one eye open and are just like, okay, so you got to be really specific and make sure, you're not, ostracizing an entire group of people.
Yeah, understood. Thank you so much for that, Jimmy. I thought that was great. A great overview and a great lead into Marco's stuff. We do have some polling questions live. I'm going to continue to keep those things open for a while. But right now, what's really interesting is which risk are you most concerned about with AI and hiring? So far, we have three for a close tie. Biggest concern is reputational risk, being accused of biased hiring. Commercial risk, missing out on the best hire. And then finally, which is something I'm very excited about, negatively impacting the talent experience in hiring itself. So those are just some of the three concerns that have been listed and highlighted in the polling question. I'm going to keep those things open so we can lead into Marko's stuff. Thank you so much, Jimmy. We're going to go ahead and bring up Marko. Marko, are you there? Marko, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Brian. I'm rarely muted and rarely muted for long. Even more rarely muted for long.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Marko, I came into contact with Marko a couple of months ago, looking for a client who needed some help and support with some AI and recruiting issues, developing some contract language. And I was just fascinated with his experience and his expertise in this area and ability to clearly articulate some of the challenges and misconceptions about what the law says about AI in the workplace. So I'm going to go ahead and let Marko talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go right into the content and you can wow them all with your brilliance.
Well, thank you for that lead in and that promise for the future, but let's focus on the reality of what we have. I'm pleased to be here, and it's nice to be virtually meeting with all of you. I'm a lawyer at Littler Mendelson, which is the world's largest labor and employment law firm, and I've been involved with the artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics space as it intersects the workforce for almost a decade now, including having written a couple law review articles and also testified before the EEOC on the topic as the only management side labor and employment lawyer to be part of that panel. This is a subject that can get people talking. And as the speaker, I guess I'm more privileged than the rest because I get to talk with the microphone, but I encourage you to ask questions if you have them.
Absolutely.
It's difficult to know where to start when you're taking on a topic this big and this transformative as we look at where it is headed and how much impact it will have on what we all do in our jobs as employees and also in the substance of what we do. So let's talk a little bit about the AI transformation of the workplace. And as a lead-in, I want to say, when people hear that in a staffing-related conversation or a hiring or recruiting-related discussion, they think about discrimination laws and privacy laws and what you're really trying to do, which often gets lost in the dialogue once lawyers get involved. So, for example, it is very common to think that, oh, everyone knows what I mean if I say this word. I just said EEOC. That means the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a group of 5 commissioners who sit in DC and are in charge of enforcing the nation's civil rights. The difficulty is what AI or machine learning or deep learning mean to you may be very different from what it means to someone whose job it is to reduce the labor costs related to plowing farm fields. So what they think of AI is a tool to create driverless tractors. And there are now a couple of really high visibility projects involved eliminating humans from basically a lot of farming operations. And that's all driven by AI and machine learning. So this is coming everywhere. And I think the big mistake many employers make is they hear the initials, they hear the words, and they immediately jump to a conclusion. So what we're trying to do today is just provide a little bit of basic framework for how AI and machine learning are dealt with in many workplace laws, but it won't hit all of them. We're going to talk about discrimination laws and algorithmic bias because that is one of the big issues. So if you're thinking about using AI to select candidates or enhance the candidate pool, you have to figure out what you're trying to accomplish. Do I want to hire people who stay longer? Do I want to hire people who perform more steadily? Do I want people with higher end skills? And you can tailor your AI use, your AI tools to match your goals, or you can try to pretend that even though you didn't try, they will just automatically somehow work. It doesn't happen very often that way. And remember, AI and machine learning were advertised as ways to reduce, if not eliminate, human bias in the selection process. But in fact, now we're finding there's a backlash where some people are saying, most notably the New York City Council, that we would rather have people able to opt out of machine learning based decision making, automated decision making, and go back to human decision making. So the irony is the tool that was created in order to reduce human bias now has an option to bypass by going back to human bias. It's as if they built a bypass around your town, but you could choose to avoid it by driving back through your town again. And it just doesn't seem to solve the problem. And then we have privacy issues, which are also highly important and very much on the minds of the EEOC commissioners when I spoke with them 5 years ago. What I would say is there were three core issues that the EEOC had on its mind in those days. One was discrimination, another was privacy, and the third one was access, and whether by relying on tools that depend on social media access and public visibility, there would be some form of larger discrimination and denial of access to disabled folks and those who are underprivileged.
Got it.
So, how the AI and robotics revolution will shape the employment and labor law landscape. Let's take a look at what we're talking about here. If you think about this, there are many terms that get used, and there's one graphic that IBM has used that uses the Russian dolls where it starts big and gets smaller and smaller. Here it's shown a little bit different way. But artificial intelligence is generally used to refer to any technique that allows computers rather, to mimic human intelligence using logic, if-then rules, decision trees, and machine learning, including deep learning. So it's all inclusive. That's the big term. The next level is frequently referred to as ML, or machine learning, which is a subset of AI that includes certain statistical techniques that allows machines to improve at tasks with experience. This category also includes deep learning. Deep learning, which is probably going to arrive when we're all living in the metaverse, is the subset of machine learning composed of algorithms that permit software to train itself to perform tasks like speech, image recognition, by exposing multi-layered neural networks to vast amounts of data. So all three of these come into play. Let's just focus at the machine learning level to highlight one problem or one issue we'll see when we turn to discrimination concerns. So if you're looking at something that allows machines to improve at tasks with experience, imagine a world where you are creating a tool and you want to hire people who are going to stay longer. And you do a study and you learn that within your current workforce, those people tend to stay longer if they live closer to your facility. This is obviously a pre-COVID study. And so when you're doing that, you look and you see that and you say, aha, I am going to go out and recruit more heavily in my zip codes that surround my facility. But then all of a sudden you look and say, I can't do that because I am actually reinforcing a demographic bias that affects certain minority group members because they don't live in those zip codes. So by focusing on zip codes, I'm going to do away with that. So I tell my mathematical ace to write the software algorithm or the algorithm to eliminate any consideration of zip code. But when you go into the machine learning and deep learning levels, what happens is that the computer teaches itself and it finds substitutes for zip code, and we may not even know it. So that's the concern that the critics of AI, machine learning, deep learning based techniques are raising is you may not be doing it intentionally, but it's having that effect because of the way machine learning and deep learning work. They are continually finding on their own substitute factors for race, age, gender, but in fact, those are no different from race, age, and gender. For example, if tall people are better at this job, it's not that all men are taller than all women, or all people of a certain racial group are taller than others, but you're going to have biases that seep in. Can you do that? That's where we're going today. So let's look at AI's transformation of the workplace and the new practice of law with two examples. transformed HR processes and unlawful algorithmic biases can end up making discrimination issues in the workplace actually worse than they were before the tool was deployed. That's a challenge. And what has happened here, many places, and I don't know that your place of employment is one of them or not, but what we have seen over the last half dozen years is that marketing departments, supply chains have found that using algorithmic based, artificial intelligence based tools have enabled them to improve performance, to do it faster and less expensively. And all of a sudden, someone in the room says, if we're doing this with our supply chain, if we're doing this with our sales and marketing, why can't we do it with our human resources, our human capital, and get the same advantages? And of course, the difficulty is you don't have discrimination laws and privacy laws that apply the same way in supply chain oversight or in customer interactions, but they do apply in employment related interactions. So what has happened is some early adopters of algorithms went ahead without involving their HR or legal teams because they felt every time they raised these issues with the HR and legal team, they heard, no, here are all the problems that you'll be creating without solutions. So what happened is they had two choices. I could have stopped, or they could have gone ahead and just amended the meeting notice to exclude HR and legal. And you can guess what happened in at least some of the cases. They went ahead. So what we're seeing is more and more challenges to transform human resource processes and claims that the algorithms themselves are importing bias into the workplace. One of the most common ways that happens is you are trying to create an ideal set, sometimes referred to as a golden set, of people to whom you aspire in your selection process. And who do you base that on? Well, typically you base it on people who have worked for you for so much time with certain level of success. Well, what if that group is more male, more white, and younger than the workforce you're looking at? Is all of a sudden, are you defining your desirable candidate in terms that are legally unacceptable? And who's taking care to make sure that's not happening and debiasing anything that might be going on? We're seeing those questions arise, and we are seeing an effort to find answers in techniques that were applied to traditional survey tools and predictive indexes and that sort of hiring aid. And it's not clear yet how that works. California, for example, right now is considering a rule that will require employers to maintain records for 4 years whenever automated data process decision-making tools are used. Well, if you're using an algorithm in an AI system that changes every time it's used, how do you keep 4 years of records of that? How do you know which version was used when my application happened to be screened? And what if I didn't even have an application? The flip side, and this is one where the US is probably behind Europe and much of the rest of the world, is that as you use more and more AI tools, you're relying on more and more data, including biometrics and data that we would typically regard as private. And so the difficulty is, how do you do that? It's compounded when you're scraping the internet as an effort to expand your pool of candidates from whom to recruit, and then from whom to select, and then to select. And the difficulty is most people don't even know that they're being reviewed and their information is being used. In Europe, in the EU, the general premise is when an employee fills out a form for the employer's allowed to use it once for the stated and designed purpose.
Only once.
Yes. In the US, we treat it as if once it's given to the employer, it's the employer's right to use it whenever, however, as many times as the employer sees fit. That's a collision of values and expectations that divides us on the global stage. But if you're working with or for a global company, and if some of you are out there saying, well, hold it, I'm not the actual employer, I'm a staffing agency, or I'm a temporary agency, I'm a PEO. The California rules under discussion right now for automated decision-making would expand liability from the employer to any agent of the employer which would include all of you as
Wow.
potentially liable for discrimination. It's not the final rule yet. They're still in a brainstorming session mode, but that's what the proposal would do right now. It's as if you were disappointed in your college decision-making admission process. So not only can you sue the college, but you can also sue the SAT and the ACT for based on their test results playing a role in that process. So moving forward, what are we seeing as states, federal government, other municipalities even try to catch up? Here's just an example, and you have to be monitoring this all the time. By the way, with the examples I gave a few minutes ago, I want to be real clear. It is not an effective strategy or the right answer for HR or legal to sit down with business leaders and say, no, we can't do this. Let's go put our head in the sand, because everyone knows some of your competitors will balance those risks and benefits differently, and they will outperform you in the marketplace and you will lose. And if you're viewed as the negative nanny trying to stop everyone from doing this, you're just going to be excluded from the dialogue. So I think we as lawyers and HR professionals and consultants and vendors need to have answers for questions, not just identify issues and say, see, I told you we can't do it. That doesn't work. So in Illinois, it was one of the pioneering states, it's where HireVue is based, to have an artificial intelligence video interview act. Remember, many programs that deal with predictive indexes or indices, whichever you prefer, and deal with hiring analytics, deal with both structured data of the sort that would be on an application you might fill out, and unstructured data of the sort that you would gain during an interview or by reading an essay or a free-form description. The Illinois Act provides an employer that asks applicants to record video interviews and uses an AI analysis of those videos must notify each applicant in writing before the interview. That sounds fine, but watch out, because that's just the statutory issue. It doesn't deal with the discrimination issue, but it sort of creates a world of people who are invited to interviews and those who aren't. Remember, one of the promises of AI and ML is it would improve human decision-making in recruiting, selection, and hiring by eliminating human bias and by making sure that we would not have as many false negatives in hiring are those people who were excluded from the next step of the process by mistake. And right now, the belief is, for example, if you're an employer of choice, you have to realize that your reject pool might be more attractive than the general public that's out there if you go post an ad someplace and try to recruit from the public at large. So it might be a less expensive way to enhance your hiring if you have a machine-based tool. Look at your human reject pile and see if there are any gems hidden in there. The Illinois law is already effective. It's not created enormous liability risks, but it is out there and it must be complied with. Illinois also has a new law coming on board, which is the AI Video Interview Act demographics reporting. It requires employers to gather and report certain demographic information. Remember something about all of this. If you're in the HR field, you know this, but let me just be clear. Generally, when people get hired, you give them a form that's detachable and voluntary to fill out and to indicate their demographic characteristics that you use then to fill out, if you're a government contractor, OFCCP reports, your affirmative action plans. And it's also used to fill out your EEO-1 if you're more than 100 employees and so on. Well, you don't have this demographic information for people who are being screened by an AI tool that's scraping the internet. So what do? Does the government just say, well, you don't have it, so therefore not a problem? Or do they impute the general availability data from your area of recruiting or from the general population? I will tell you that in our interactions with government agencies, their tendency has clearly been to say, if your report is, I would have done that analysis, but I couldn't because I don't know the demographic traits of the people who are applying here. They say, we don't care. 50-50 is the basic breakdown of the population between men and women. We assume that your pool is 50-50. If it's not, the burden is on you to explain otherwise, and that's not always easily done. Maryland also has a facial recognition during an interview law. This matters if you are using technology that records and then uses video. So you may have a process that you think of as a live video interview, but if the technology you're using is actually recording the interviewee and then broadcasting it, you may be subject to this inadvertently. Just an example of some of the things we have to be paying attention to.
So, Marko, real quick, we're getting a couple of questions. One of them that came across is, what are some of the penalties if we look at these three laws in these 2 different states? What are just some of the consequences for failure to comply with these?
And there's an old saying on this one, Brian, and it was a school board up in Eveleth, Minnesota, where my father was born, and the school board was asked questions by the public. And each time the chair of the school board said, John, he turned to the lawyer, what's the answer? And John said, Bill, I'll look it up in the books and get back to you next meeting. And at the end of the meeting, one of the immigrant minors stood up and said, folks, I no understand this. You not fire lawyer, hire book. Well, I'm going to say at some of these, I'm going to need to look at a book. There is a private right of action with modest liability possible under the Illinois Act, but it's severe. The Maryland Act remedies are not memorable to me right now. I think that right now these are more in the nature of statutory fines and penalties and modest numbers. These aren't the laws like discrimination laws that create back pay liability and emotional distress damages and those sorts of things.
Got it.
But they could, and we'll see where they go. Here's one of the new big ones that I think could transform the way people are hired in the country, if not the world. New York City, late or early this year, adopted a law that takes effect in a year. It requires that an employer using an automated employment decision tool screen candidates, notify each such candidate. But not only that, it has 2 more requirements that matter. One, before it uses the tool, it has to audit the fairness of the tool. And no one knows what that means. There are no regulations. And frankly, based on what we've been able to learn, the Adams administration in New York City was not even aware the law existed when it took office. And there are no current plans to have regulations out before the middle of the summer and to even address it before then, because they feel they have plenty of time. Of course, if you're an employer, how do you do an audit when you don't know what you're auditing to? Second thing it does is it gives each candidate, after they get the notice, time to respond and say, I opt out of the automated decision-making system. No one knows what that means. So they go back to the human system. Well, how do you compare that, the one to the other? One candidate's chosen by an algorithm, one's chosen by a human recruiter. No one knows where that's going. And that also does have penalties for failure to comply. I don't know what they are without having the law in front of me. Portland, Oregon is joining the party. I don't know, or has joined the party. One of the things that those of you who deal with national employment issues should know is that Oregon, Washington, and the state of Colorado are in a race to see who can be next to California and most difficult to deal with. So let's turn to the next and think about what the EEOC is doing and has underway, started in the fall. They have a new initiative to make sure artificial intelligence and other technologies used in hiring and other employment decisions are compliant. They have an internal working group. They've got listening sessions with key stakeholders. They're gathering information, identifying promising practices, and issuing technical assistance is the goal. That isn't out yet. I don't want to drill down too many legal rabbit holes because not many people find it interesting, even if they are specialized in the field. And if you're not a lawyer working in this, it won't matter. The key point is that this EEOC initiative started at a time and remains now a 3-2 Republican to Democrat EEOC. In July, that's going to change to 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. It's likely that the EEOC will become much more proactive in reaching into this space. The OFCCP is already very active in this space. And in fact, Jenny Yang, the leader of the OFCCP, is instrumental in what's going on in the state of California to advance a very aggressive program aimed at AI and other automated decision-making systems. So let's talk just for a second about what I said isn't that interesting, and that's discrimination law itself. This is a little bit of a square peg, round hole problem. I think the next slide gets to it a little bit and just sets the table for you. Historically, employers and staffing companies and vendors and temporary agencies have used tests or other instruments to help identify strong candidates. For those in executive suite jobs, they tend to be a little bit more elaborate. For those in software coding jobs, they tend to be different. For those needing typing skills, they're a little bit different. And in some retail jobs, we used to have the paper and pencil honesty tests that were popular. The general rule was, if this is motivated by a desire to discriminate, and there's evidence that it is intentionally discriminating against people, that is illegal. It's called disparate treatment discrimination. The question is, can that be applied to machines that don't have any conscious intentions at all? Or is it sort of machines are exempt from these rules? Well, unfortunately, right now, someone is starting that program and writing that initial algorithm, and it's not right now a machine. And if it is a machine, there's someone who wrote the algorithm that programmed that machine. We're not quite yet to the world where, like 2001, HAL is programming all the future computers. So what we need to do is be aware that there's a risk if we overtly tell our computer system to give me results that are 50% white, 30% Latinx, 20% or 10% Asian American, and 20% African American. You can't do that. That would be disparate treatment discrimination, even though it's being done using machines. And you can't race or gender norm as a general rule without running afoul of those problems. In the testimony before the EEOC, that was problematic for the data scientists who are testifying, because they said to the commissioners, we don't think this way. You tell us what results you want the program to generate, we'll write the algorithm. But we don't think about your anti-discrimination laws the way you do. We need guidance. So then the other kind of discrimination is the one where most of the activity is existing right now and has existed with the tools historically. And that's called disparate impact. And I think the next slide gets us to that. And it's where most employers and vendors are concerned. And what happens there is you have a system that on its surface is neutral, but in practice treats different groups differently. Height is one that, you say we have a 6-foot height requirement. That's going to exclude more women from a percentage standpoint than men. So unintentional, maybe even job related, but it excludes one group or more at a disproportionate rate. That alone is not illegal. But then if a challenger, whether it's a government or a regulatory agency or a plaintiff's law firm, shows a disparate impact, the question becomes, was that okay? And the employer can show, I think maybe the next, hit the button one more time, we'll get another bullet. We can show that this is job related and tied to business necessity. Typically, that's been done by IO psychologists using validation studies. No one knows how validation studies truly work with algorithms in a way the EEOC and courts will approve. We're all in the learning process for that. And that's where the challenge is, because if you do enough hiring, sooner or later, you're going to have an adverse impact or disparate impact somewhere. And is it job related and tied to business necessity? That's what we're looking to find out. So
sorry to interrupt you, Mark. I just want to answer a question. We have a question that I want to just show on the screen from Arthur. Is the burden of proof on plaintiffs or on discrimination cases? Is it common for plaintiffs to gain access to proprietary algorithms?
The burden of proof is on the plaintiffs, but with disparate impact, that burden is to show the existence of the disparate impact, and then the burden shifts to the employer or vendor to show that the impact was tied to something job related and related to business necessity. The rest of it gets very complicated and involved. I think the access to the proprietary information in an algorithm inside the black box is something that is yet to be litigated extensively. We are seeing and we are defending, by the way, one vendor who is being sued by an engineering candidate who says your tool was used by more than 100 employers who all rejected me. And I'm not filing suits against the 100 employers, I'm suing you. And how successful the plaintiff will be in learning what's inside that black box, we're going to learn in real time. But those are very important questions. We don't yet know the answer. But we can give you some recommendations here. I think the next slide gets to those. And then make sure if you're using AI and machine learning or some form of deep learning, that you're advising applicants and employees that it's being used upfront. That will make it better. Before you use it or commit to it, evaluate the public data concerning its reliability. And I would tell you, in conversations with the vendor, you should be asking, if you're an employer, do you have validation studies that I can see? Tell me what you're doing about that. And second, if I do get sued, will you indemnify me? Answer will probably be no. They'll ask to be indemnified themselves, and you'll have a bargaining session to deal with that. But the next questions will be, if I do get sued, will you make expert witnesses available and help explain why your tool is fair to a jury? Third thing, maintain a human HR review process before decisions are final. Don't allow machine learning right now to make final decisions. The world isn't quite ready for that. If you're doing that, you're taking a much greater risk than if you have a combo system. Remember that the information right now is, if you give medical charts to a doctor, he or she will get so much right. A computer will outperform the doctor diagnostically. But if you give the doctor a computer, the doctor with the computer will outperform either the computer or the other doctors who stand alone. Finally, you have to watch your results and make sure, by the way, not just that there is no disparate impact on protected categories, but make sure it's working. If you used a tool to get more candidates, streamline the process, do these things, make sure the tool is doing what it promised to do as well, because that's important to the legal defense, as well as making sure there's no disparate impact on a protected category. The next set of issues are privacy related, and they are actually much more straightforward and historically in line.
I'm gonna go ahead and invite Jimmy back on the stage because we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that he has some questions he wants to ask before we go into some general questions. So, Jimmy, I'm going to go ahead and hide the screen for a second and let you go ahead and ask Marko a couple of questions.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Marko. This was great, and I think super informative, and it spurred a discussion. There's a common tool out there, Glider AI, that is fantastic, but I think raises some concerns that you did, and there was a chat with Chris Farm of Salesforce around that as well. But one of the questions I really wanted to ask when you were speaking of the California brainstorm, as it were, right now, you mentioned that the recruiting organization, as an affiliate or a partner in this endeavor, would be on the hook. I want to ask a question for our clients out there and our partners, the enterprises. I know there are quite a few on a call. As a staffing provider, contingent workforce, we actually are the employer for these workers that are going on site, to say Littler or otherwise. We are the employer of record. We process their paychecks. Would then this law then, if we utilize this for our sourcing efforts, would our client, where we're placing the extended workforce, would they be roped into this as well? Do they become liable?
I think right now there's a strong push at all levels to do what you just sort of foreshadowed. One is, if you have temporary employees or agency employees working alongside your workforce, the growing standard started in California, it's spreading everywhere, is if they're engaged in the production activity of the organization, they are not an independent contractor, they're an employee of that organization. Now, interestingly, the question of who cares comes up, because if you, as a staffing agency, are issuing a W-2 and things, the government may not care as much as a private discrimination lawyer might. So generally speaking, the line between the host and the and the agency is diminishing. And if you're using a tool as the agency, that's also coming in. So you
Yeah.
could, if you're a clever plaintiff's lawyer, have 3 levels of pocketbooks to aim at: the host, the agency, and the vendor.
It would seem as though moving forward, we may see in these sort of enterprise agreements from buyers of contingent labor, they issue standards to staffing firms all the time that we have to do. It seems like as we move forward that this may be a new clause in some of these enterprise contingent labor agreements that govern the use of your sourcing activity to ensure that they don't get roped in.
I think that's very likely, Jimmy, and I think you're seeing the procurement departments working more closely with their HR teams as they start to appreciate this risk.
Yeah.
Would there have to be a specialized carve out, Marko, as opposed to something like compliance with laws? Would that be covered under a traditional clause where it says, you're going to comply, you're going to give me a compliant tool, you're going to do everything in compliance with legal and regulatory concerns?
Well, Brian, there are 2 levels of question there. One is, as a matter of contract, I would expect to see lots of those clauses. And that sort of goes with who ultimately bears the financial risk associated with the legal challenges. But whether the civil rights agencies, the governments, the courts are going to respect those agreements when it comes to the claim by the individual who's affected, and whether it's the test creator, the agency, or the host, you don't know. And I think what we've seen is an erosion of what used to be fairly clear lines of demarcation. And I think you've probably experienced that with just a routine EEOC charge, where you think it belongs to you or the host thinks it belongs to you, and the government may not agree, even though both of you do.
It's a whole new element of co-employment coming our way, which maybe a new Darden factor as we move forward. But it is interesting as well, because I think we're seeing it, like we see enterprises mandating the use of certain tools to us as suppliers. You know,
Right.
They're the ones driving it. It's less about us sometimes than them, which another thing. So maybe a new Darden factor in the future.
I love the reference to the Darden factor for all of those who are really nerding out. That's super impressive. I think we have time for like one sort of question, and then we'll go into some of the closing details, which is, Jimmy, one of the things that I know is really important to you at nTech, and one of the reasons why you put this session together was, how do we put the human and humanization into AI? How do you create a more human experience, leveraging those tools in the best possible way while managing the risk? I think that's the kind of closing question I'll have for both of you guys, and then we'll get into some of the kind of details. How do you ensure that you create a human experience and focus on the experience of the candidate? Because from our statistics right here, most of the people are concerned about that very thing, commercially missing out on the best hire, and then overall experiencing the talent experience, or creating a negative talent experience. How do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I go back to my slide where I said, identify your best athlete, the technology or the human. It's not a one or the other. And I think there's a lot of room for market research and analysis. I know Suzette from nTech's on the call around. What do the candidates want to, how do they want to interact? Because I think there's no secret that candidates want an easy technology experience for a lot of what they're doing. It makes their life easier. It's not just for but there's also an element that they really just want you to pick up that phone and talk to them. And so I really think if you have good process management, good quality controls, look at your steps and identify that best athlete. Is it a human? Is it technology? But there needs to be an integration of both. A one size fits all will not work. And I just finished with that. Anybody, the same thing I said earlier, anybody who's ever issued a survey where you then had a follow-up call, what has been more important or more meaningful? Was it the survey result, or was it that follow-up call? So finding those lanes to increase engagement is important. The dream of an automated process, soup to nuts, as I like to say, for source to hire. Marko said it. I don't think we're there right now.
I would just say this: be deliberate and intentional about what you do. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yep.
Many of these tools make things better. They make it more efficient, more effective, less discriminatory, and can be done while respecting privacy rights. So just because it doesn't eliminate all discrimination or brings a modest amount of legal risk, prepare for that, plan for that in your agreements, plan for that in your processes, and then measure your results. And if it's working, continue to use it. If it's not working, tweak it, and make sure you're monitoring the discrimination side so you're not creating unmonitored legal risk that you're not prepared to defend.
Fantastic, everybody. Thank you for your questions, insight, and thanks to all of our participants. These are the contact details for all of the geniuses that we have on the phone. We will be having a roundtable session for a couple of minutes afterwards. You can see this once we end the session. You can jump on board. Marko and Jimmy and I jump onto those tables and just answer any questions you have. And if no one shows up, then we'll just stare at each other. How do we do? We're very obsessed about that here. We want to make sure that we continue to deliver excellent experiences and also create things for you that you want to see, hear, and learn about. We have a little survey that we have. You can access that on this QR code or the link down below. And everybody who completes the survey will be entered into a drawing to win a Defiant Solutions Yeti. Be the envy of your friends and family with this mug around Christmas time. And without further ado, thanks so much, Marko. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, all of the attendees. Thank you, Rahul, for your technical support. And we will see you in the breakout rooms. Thank you so much.